Hello and welcome to a new episode of Crazy Buildings. Today we will be visiting what is said to be the world's largest shopping mall, and we will be talking about shopping malls, retail properties, etc. This is going to be yet another interesting one. Join me. And since today is all about shopping and leisure, I've borrowed a very nice car so that we can enjoy the trip over to Changzhou, about 2.5 hours from Shanghai. Let me be upfront about it. Retail property investments is not my main area of expertise. In many ways, some of my colleagues may be better suited to do this episode. So today's episode in many ways is more about entertainment than about learning. But of course, I will be sharing some of my observation when it comes to best practices for retail properties. When we speak of the world's largest shopping mall, then there are of course various ways to measure that. Is it by square meters, is it by size, or is it by revenue, etc. And the one we are visiting now is about 1 million square meters in size, about 11 million square feet. That's about 140 soccer fields, so absolutely massive. It is the biggest one in China, I believe, not necessarily the biggest one in the world anymore at this point in time. And let's think of it in terms of turnover. The Global Harbor Mall in Changzhou Huanzhougang, rakes in about $1 billion in annual turnover, and that is trumped in China by the IFC Mall in Shanghai with about $1.8 billion and by the SKP Mall in Beijing with $3.2 billion. And here we are about to arrive at Changzhou Global Harbor, and look at that. You know that a property development is huge when it has its own designated highway exit leading directly into the development's parking garage. That is something quite unique, I'd say. When we speak to international brands, the most successful brands in retail in China, several points they teach us are including, in China you gotta spend a higher percentage of your turnover on rent, but in return you also derive a higher revenue per square meter. Secondly, you constantly need promotions, events for all the holidays. You need discounts in order to drive revenue and so on. And something that never fails to surprise me is how big the price difference can be within the same mall from one end to another end, or from one floor to another floor. For example, the ground floor may cost something like 25 Chinese yuan per square meter per day. The second floor less than half, like 10. And the third floor maybe a quarter, maybe 5 or 6 Chinese yuan a square meter a day. And that goes to show that if you're a brand relying on those impulse buys, and if you need the branding and so on, you may need to pay that high rent for the ground floor. And if you are a food and beverage retailer or another brand where you say, well, I'm actually the one drawing in the guests into the mall, then you can get away with paying a very low rental. And with that, it is time for today's edition of True Story. We had a European retailer, a very luxurious brand, that had not yet entered the Chinese market by themselves, but were only selling their products through a distributor. Now that distributor had not invested a lot of money into beautiful store locations or store renovations, and therefore the brand in China was perceived as less luxurious, as less desirable as it would be in other markets. So our client decided, let's enter the Chinese market by ourselves and let's only give certain territories to the distributor and let us operate own flagship stores in key locations like Shanghai by ourselves. Now here's what we had to do in order to help them acquire their first flagship store, because at the time the prime retail landlords were not willing to give space on a ground floor corner location to that brand that was not really known, and especially not known for being a luxurious brand. So we found out about a corner retail location on a ground floor near Shanghai's Xintiandi, and we knew about that even before it was known in the market, because the watches brand was moving to another even bigger location for their shop. And then we made contact with the senior leadership of the landlord of that development and sold them on the idea of giving the space to our tenant for a new concept, for a new flagship store. And we showed them 3D rendering images and sold them on the idea that they would be the first mall in China carrying that brand's flagship store. And then thirdly, we helped the tenant negotiate for good lease terms, especially for a clause that prevents the landlord from terminating them early. And finally, helped them successfully sign the lease. And of course, that location was a little bit expensive, but the whole story turned out to be a huge success story, because the store eventually became one of Asia's top selling locations for the brand, even on a global level, one of the top revenue stores. So a beautiful success story.